It is an really immense pleasure for us to be able to participate in the teaching of this department, which works with we quite admire, or at least I do. My name is Barbara Kundračíková. I'm the Chief Curator in the Olomouc Museum of Art, Central European Forum, and will moderate today's program. The session, as such, deals with the complex issue of preserving new media works of art in public institutions. It focuses on a full range of activities necessary for the technical protection of the work, its correct interpretation and presentation. The series is based on the Central European Art Database project, New Media Museums, which is organized in cooperation with the Slovak National Gallery, WRO Art Center, C3 Center for Culture and Communication Foundation, and PAF, Film Animation and Contemporary Art Festival. The project is led by Dušan Barok and Jakub Frank, who also co-organized this online series on which we will meet in October. This project reflects the current Central European situation but tries to approach it from a more general perspective. The seminar is one of many. Nevertheless, there are two moments I find important. It purposefully connects professionals with students, academics, and theoreticians with practicing archivists, curators, or even artists, and also gives an opportunity to discuss one problem from all three, so similar as well as dissimilar perspectives, those of the artist, the curator, and institution, where we all meet eventually. Let's enjoy ourselves, but also the time we have been given the opportunity to share. Over the last 40 years, a lot has changed in the realm of once new media art, although it is considered to be well connected with our own time, to be the art of our times actually. Institutions that conceive and create an image of those times, like museums or archives, do not seem to share or be able to share fully this view. Although there are many well-established galleries or festivals worldwide, many collaborative projects, databases, forums, etc., collective institutions stay a bit resistant. Thus, we might witness the erasure of a significant portion of cultural memory, which it would be natural to protect in other circumstances. The reasons are, of course, perfectly understandable, going from the technical ones to the structural ones. However, the question remains whether the situation is acceptable or whether it can be improved in any way. I would like to stress at this moment that my own experience is largely the experience of these institutions of collective memory. All established is dark history. That is why this area represents such an interesting intellectual problem, and probably not just for me. It's obviously related to the way we think about ourselves, about the basic values of this society: quality, originality, materiality, sustainability, and others. While we will all probably agree that the exclusion of such a large domain of human culture, although we might not be experts or even like this area, is a significant problem for all involved, the main questions still remain: what shall we do? To find a solution, let's ask ourselves, is it possible to broaden the normal scope of collecting institutions? Is it possible to learn anything useful from other disciplines or fields, and not just in the matter of protection? But also, is it possible to take advantage of the still specific background of the new media art production and use it for so-called greater good? In some sense, this seems like a litmus paper. It very well may turn out that the current system doesn't work for this kind of form, or for any other future form that we are not even able to imagine for now. We may find out that the museal globalism doesn't make sense anymore, that the key to success is the sharing, and not only of knowledge or information, but also of the material. And the result could also be a rewriting of the famous and unbreakable Theseus ship paradox, because the dilemma of keeping the original in an intact form versus replacing obsolete parts is the real nomen omen of the new media art problem. So stay positive and share your views. This is exactly the reason why we have invited colleagues from different platforms with different experiences and proposing different ideas. So we might be able to find out our own way of this, not just an intellectual trap. This meeting is divided into 4 parts, in which 4 institutions or experts will present themselves. There are a WRO Art Center with Agnieszka Kubická-Czedušická and Cezary Wicher, Ursula Blikle Video Archive with Claudia Slaner, Czech National Film Archive with Markéta Jonášová and Matěj Strnad, and Patricia Falcao, representing Tate Gallery and Goldsmiths University of London. After every presentation, there will be space for a few direct questions. At the end of the session, the main discussion takes part. It will be moderated by Dušan Barok, whom we all know as leading expert in the field and also a committed organizer of professional networking. So to start with, not to talk too long, WRO is Poland's first institution working at the intersection of contemporary art, media, and communication. Its programs reach out to a broad public through its premises in Wrocław, as well as an extensive online presence. Throughout more than 30 years of experience, WRO has also built a unique collection of artworks. In the past years, the institution became more involved in the issue of surrounding its preservation, especially the work of video art, and is interested in expanding its scope to other domains of media art. Strongly embedded in a network of art institutions in Poland and internationally, it is the best position to contribute and share knowledge acquired through this project to wide community. There are two speakers from the institutions whom I would like to introduce. So first of them is Agnieszka Kubicka-Dzieruszicka, who works as a curator and coordinator of artistic events in the field of media art and culture projects. She has been cooperating with the WRO Foundation since 1995 and actively participates in the majority of artistic educational events organized within the framework of this institution, including several successive editions of the WRO Media Art Biennial. I think all of us do know these biennials, and they're absolutely beautiful. She is the co-creator of the art mediation program at WRO Art Center, and her practice in the field is also the point of reference for her classes on art mediation at the Gepard Academy of Art and Design in Wrocław. As curatorial director of media, she worked with Sapporo International Art Festival CEAD from 2018-2020. Cezary Wicher is a member of the WRO Biennial curatorial team. He studies cultural studies at the University of Wrocław. He writes about literature and visual arts and has published, among others, in magazine Szum, Odra, and Maliforma. So now I would like to invite you both and ask you to present your institution and your approach to new media art. Welcome here.
Thank you, Barbara, for this introduction. Welcome all. Cezary will be operating our presentation that starts soon. We will, that's the title of our presentation, and at the same time, I would say that the collection and the various ways of making available this heritage collected over 30 years are at the very center of what we are doing. I propose that we'll start with a short trailer introducing some of our activities carried out at the WRO Art Center and within the framework of the Media Art Biennale WRO. So while looking at the video, I'll try to bring to you our history. So 1989 was the first edition of the so-called Sound Basis Art Art Festival, which this name was introduced since the term of media art was not so well known, but the intersection between sound and moving image was very important back then. This is actually also important to say that we started out as a private company because it was the only way to organize ourselves back then. And we changed our status to a non-commercial foundation in 1998. I'm speaking about this identity, about our identity, because the mission of collecting art and preserving it and making it available is strictly connected to the identity of the institution. So we are an NGO which could open its premises as an art center due to the support of the city of Wrocław in 2008. We do what an art center, contemporary art center does. We also carry out activities that are typical for collecting institutions such as museums. We also produce new artworks, we run residencies, we reach out to our community and try to engage people as much as possible using different forms. Of course, exhibitions are the most like basic form, but everything that is around an exhibition is as important as this outcome, which is an exhibition. So we do research on our archives. We do workshops. We also publish books. We also work a lot with kids, families. We carry out projects in a public space. We try to be present in some very unique locations, like, for instance, this exhibition of István Kantor you saw took place in an old department store. Our presence in public spaces is related to several artworks which are present there. They might have a very physical form, but also form of applications and web-based artworks, but also you see here a wonderful piece, megaphones, that is placed in the nature. These interconnections between technology, nature, and society are also very important focus of our activities. We also are present outside of WRO. We do traveling exhibitions. We do screenings within the WRO on tour series, which usually comprises some chosen artworks from the most recent edition of the WRO Biennial, but also from our archive. Art mediation, that's very important. It was originally the name of our educational program, but actually we discovered that it's much more than that. It's about a new paradigm, how to involve audiences, how to connect artists with the audiences, and how to create a meaningful program that would engage community. I'm really happy because we can see here some important artworks that the other speakers in other sessions will address and talk about. Basically, these are the origins of our collections, of our archive and collection. What you see are actually part of our archive. By having said that, I want to stress out that this cultural memory that Barbara was addressing before is the very center of our archive. We do document our events by ourselves from the very beginning. In the 1990s, we could collaborate for many years with the Polish public television. We were then programming the art part of that program and could document lots of our activities with professional means. We could not only documented our activities, but also art events and taking place in other places and cities, such as at the CEAD or Transmediale, the important festivals. So you see here the different art mediation activities that are also very well documented. And by this I mean such classical forms as interviews with the artists, registration of several, I would say, learning processes, lectures and talks by theoreticians. We also do lectures by ourselves. Let's say this self-learning approach is very, very important. And we do publish books along with media artworks, with documentations, those multimedia publications. So this is the source of our archive, and out of this archive we have been carving out our collection. Yeah, that's the 30 years of history, the first catalog of the first edition, and the facade, the glass facade of our building. I think that's the time to give the word to my colleague, who will specifically address the issue of archives and its contents. Cezary?
Sorry, my microphone was off, so great. Once again. Thank you, Agnieszka. As Agnieszka said, the WRO archive is growing every year. We have over 7,000 physical materials in VHS format, Betacam, HTC, containing video materials, documentation, lectures, all activities. Of these 7,000 records, about 1,500 have been digitalized. And we also have several files scattered in clouds, servers, and drives. The history of WRO collection is also the history of technological change, the digital revolution. But let's back to the collection, because if you get the collection, one of the most important questions is how to make it visible for our publicity. WRO uses its collection in many different ways. Our archive is a base for lectures, exhibitions, and publications. WRO has initiated series VDoc. The publication series VDoc aims to present the history of media art using the collection's resources. There are publications emphasizing media theory, individual artists like Namjoon Paik or Istvan Kantor, but also treating the history of a given scope of the field, such as the history of interactive installations, of video installations. When we creating the last two publications in particular, namely VDoc 4 and 5, the entire WRO team wrote texts for the publications that are analysis and interpretation of a given work, the documentation of which is a part of our archive, setting it in an appropriate context.
Yeah, that was actually very funny, because only the accountant division didn't have to write the text. So it was also, let's say, an art mediation strategy to invite younger colleagues who couldn't experience these artworks live, but they only could use documentation to involve them in analyzing the artworks by providing also a new, let's say, perspective after 20 or 25 years.
Yeah, yes. And these two publications, VDoc 4 and 5, are accompanied by a digital extension, a website where the video material covered by the corresponding publication text can be played. The websites accompanying the publication are not the only place where we make our video collection available. This year we opened a new incarnation of the media library, czytelnia.wrocenter.pl. It is a place where you can play our video materials from anywhere in the world, both archival ones dating back to the beginnings of the WRO, and from this year biennial WRO Reverso. it is by far the biggest collection, constantly expanded, and ultimately it is the place where where our collection will be available. We also use popular websites such as YouTube or Vimeo. We think that is the way, by trying to make properly prepared materials available in as many ways as possible, we can reach different types of audience, because everyone, has their habits related to the user experience of the websites. And they also rank much better in search engines that aggregate materials on the web, like Google and so on.
Yeah, we try to make this heritage available as much as possible by using really, I would say, unique methods. Here you see, for instance, 2 photos from a guided tour through our storage and archive. So it was a real experience to the people participating in it, to see an old VHS tape with a television program we did in the 1990s on media art, and seeing it on an old television. So it might be really exciting to just show the carriers, the physical carriers, the different tapes in different formats, and explain all the efforts that are connected to dragging out, I would say, these recorded materials out of these carriers and make them available. And another way is to use the strategy of recontextualization of these materials. On the left side, there is a wonderful example of an art installation, that we created. Paweł Janicki is here listening with us, the artist and member of the WRO team. He, with us as a WRO Center group, we made this recontextualization of the 2 photographs taken from the transmission of moon landing by Zygmunt Rydka, an important Polish photographer, who donated these photographs to us. And at the same time, on this old CRT, on this old television tube, the film by Roger Méliès was projected. So another example is on the right side. It's the photograph of the exhibition Reincarnation of Media Art, that was conceived by Yamaguchi Center for Art and Media and the Exonimo group. We showed together the Polish variant of it. What you see here is that artwork, and that exhibition showed only that artworks, objects that cannot be run anymore, along with the documentation, along with recordings of this cultural memory and issues around the lifespan of a media artwork, because we cannot preserve everything. The technology becomes obsolete in a very fast pace, but you can still tell the story, you can still transmit the idea of an artwork, even having a dead object. And here, these are the inner parts of Zen for TV by Namjoon Paik. This is the version from 1976. Which was preserved by his former student and European assistant Joachim Saueracker. So these are only the 2 examples of this recontextualization strategy, where we try to use a very classic techniques used in the field of media art. We try to translate important artistic gestures into new artworks being created now, even with more recent technology, including software-based works and such strategies as emulation in cases when the original technology is not available anymore, but giving this this kind of look and feel of the obsolete technology seems very important to us. Regard media art in a broad cultural perspective and social perspective, and we believe that the changes of technology also have impact on how do we interact with art, and through this lens we can also better understand society. So I think that's all, and also our time is off. So if there are any immediate questions, we are happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Agnieszka. Thank you, Cezary. It was a very nice presentation. I can see Dusan, which means his camera is working. So I would like to welcome him. Dusan, can you hear me? Is all fine with you? And would you be so kind and moderate our discussion for the first time? Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation as well, Agnieszka and Cezary. I would like to ask about, you use this interesting expression that you carve out the collection out of the archive. Can you talk maybe a little bit in more detail? What does it involve, and also maybe in more general terms, how to distinguish between these, let's say, two ways to, let's say, preserve or care for the works. So what is the difference between the works if they're in the archive rather than in collection in raw?
Yeah, maybe I start with that. This carving out has, of course, something to do with framing and editing, and it's very much connected to our roots experience of working with television, actually. In order to show 30 seconds of an artwork, we have recorded hours of documentation and talks with artists. These materials were used in a very little percentage. So carving out means really reframing, editing, really editing. So lots of materials in the VDoc publishing series are newly edited archival materials, recordings of performances, for instance. So such an documentation being edited properly can have a status of an original work of art. Such was, for instance, the case with the very famous performance by Józef Robakowski, I Am Electric. He performed that in a big television studio where we organized an exhibition in mid-90s with live audience in the studio. So it was broadcast live, but it is the only existing recording of that performance. So the edited version, years later, being also part of an extensive book devoted to Józef Robakowski, along with 4 DVDs, biomechanical recordings we published also at the beginning of the 2000s, became the artwork, the original artwork. And this is the example of only one performance work. You can imagine this situation in case of some media installations. And as we sit here, we all understand that showing an artwork in a new location, it already changes it. And when you deal with media art, it usually you have to change something in the code, or the equipment is slightly different, the spatial situation is slightly different. So each presentation of an artwork in a new location is changing the work in a way. So proper documentations can, properly edited, properly framed, can have a status, this other status, I would say. In such case, such a documentation goes directly from the archival part, from the archive part to the collection part, and becomes then available in our media library or within curated screening programs. And yeah, it's also important to remember that in the early days of media art, the native form of its presentations were ephemeral, short events. So documenting them was the only way to keep the memory of it and to preserve the artworks presented there. And of course, digitization is the most important means of preserving such recordings on the analog carriers. So, as Cesare mentioned, the majority of these recordings are already digitized, but we still struggle with that. We do it in-house. We do not have a professional preservation or conservation department. We all create all these departments in the institution. So basically, everyone is part of that process. And if you have a 90 minutes Betacam tape from 1997, you can say that you have several archival items on it. So while editing and reframing them, you can really literally carve out these items and turn them into, let's say, exhibition pieces, because we also used to, several times we developed some, let's say, installation-based environments to even bodily, to enable even a bodily engagement with the collection, using such sensors as Kinect cameras and other cameras, but providing this sense that this archive needs some attention and some action to be entered was very important. So we've had very interesting experiences with that, because of course for the audience it's totally not sexy to sit down at the computer and open up the files, or the online access is very important, but providing or proposing these more engaging, interactive, installation-like and staged environment to interact with the archive gives this more lively form of engagement, and let's say uses the methods of art actually to enter the archive.
Yeah, thank you for this. I guess this is also maybe a thread that will go through our conversations today. I'm not sure if we have time for more questions, or whether there are some in the chat. Unfortunately, chat is not accessible to me for some reason, so I can see whether there's anything happening there. No other questions. But Barbara, do we still have time for? I would have another one.
Like, because I think there are actually 1,000 questions Agnieszka answer, so we'll see how it works.
Okay. So you also mentioned earlier that you don't have time to preserve everything. So that is, of course, the resources are not limitless, and so for every organization. So I wonder, what are the maybe criteria, or what are the kind of reasonings to for selections, which pieces are to be, let's say, carved out from the archive into collection, and is it mainly curatorial, or is it more kind of day-to-day that, okay, we need to this work for this or that exhibition for reasons, so it's like kind of pragmatic decisions, or how would you describe this?
It's mostly a conscious curatorial decision, and maybe a good example is what we immediately started to do after the first lockdown. Basically, we prepared for each week a new screening program online. And the curatorial reasoning behind it was the state of emergency that we all experienced. So we have chosen, actually it was the younger colleagues who took care of, who also proposed these curatorial approaches, and also proposed the artworks to be shown within these programs. Maybe Cezary, you could put on chat some of these programs from our website. Of course, also, if you have been in the position of documenting your own curatorial projects and things you organized, you have this experience of what was really great, and this is a shared experience. So very, very often it was the case that everyone was pretty clear about that. This certain piece has been so great that we have to share immediately. So I think that in such type of organization as we are, where, let's say, the experience of the years and the knowledge is layering and is like shared all the time within a rather small team, it's you know, it's pretty easy to decide, but of course this we also feel the, let's say, burden and the entire responsibility connected to the fact that really we are the only institution producing, promoting, collecting, and sharing, storing this type of art in this country. So even if we don't have all these professional departments, we have the, let's say, at least the conscious of this experience and the need, the urge to do it. So let's say the certain line of media art history that is the site-specific media art history seen from the Polish perspective. So that was also very important, and the VDOC publishing series is, for instance, an expression of that approach, where we started to develop a certain line from, like, starting from, you know, experimental cinema, where we also used parts of recordings from other archives and collections in order to create an international context for some Polish artworks. So in most of the cases, these were conscious curatorial decisions, or this kind of shared experience, and the feeling that exactly this material is very important to be shared now.
Thank you so much. Do any guests have any comments, questions, feedback to Agnieszka and Cezary? Or any members of interactive media group, students, friends, visitors? Okay, we'll yes.
Can you hear me?
If there's a moment, I'm just very curious about the reception to your show on dead artworks. How did the public take that? It sounds. I'm really sorry I missed it.
Well, I think we have really good audience. We like since years, since years. Also because of the certain, like, back some years ago at the beginning, it was the effect of technological tools used for art. So, you know, back in the 90s, people would come to maybe see a computer and a printer, you know, like in the gallery setting. But also our city has this tradition and a good atmosphere for really experimental art forms in many fields. So there is a certain readiness for experiment. And since we run the WRO Art Center, that was, you know, when we opened that was our big question. Okay, we had, you know, tens of thousands of people coming to our festivals, but will they come on daily basis? That is why this art mediation program immediately started, and we started to work with families and kids, which are still very much in the focus. And it's amazing because, you know, the kids that were 7 in 2008, they are grown-ups now. So we have several cases where those kids started to volunteer for us and work with us, and that's super rewarding. But of course, this is a constant work. So you know your audience today, but you don't know your audience tomorrow. So I think this art mediation is a program, and with all its various outputs, it's really the main axis. Also. Of our activities. Also, it's worth to mention that since 2011, me and Piotr Krajewski, one of the founders, we teach at the Art Academy, Eugeniusz Geppert Academy of Fine Art and Design in Wrocław. When we were invited to do classes, the department was still called the Department for Art Education, but after the year, you know, we had this idea, okay, we have this program of art mediation, it's maybe something, another approach, because we see this process as an not only curatorial and institutional practice, but also, let's say, a creative art practice where the artists consciously involve viewer in their artwork while creating it. It's not only about these classical forms with, I don't know, shared authorship or you know, several participatory approaches, but this is this kind of approach where the artists are sensitive to the issue of art reception and their audiences. So we proposed that, and this, in fact, a new faculty was created with new programs. So it was really very nice, and the teaching takes place at the WRO Art Center. So within, you know, those 10 years, I've been maybe, I don't know, 5 times at the academy, because the students come to us. So the exhibitions give the starting point, the departure point, the departure point for further considerations and for teaching of some practical but also theoretical moments. So I think it's okay with the reaction of the audience. It's okay, but there is no reason to sit down and say, yeah, it's great, we are great, it's done. This work never ends. So you have to constantly reach out and find out new forms, because there is new audience every day. Thank you.
Maybe we'll move on. I'm not sure who is am I the timekeeper, or is it you?
No, but I think I just lost it, so we'll see how it works during the whole session. But now I would like to welcome Claudia Slaner very much, because it's a huge pleasure to have her here. And again, thank you to Agnieszka and Cezary. First of all, I'll introduce Ursula Blickle Archive very quickly, and Claudia herself, and then I'll give her floor. So since its inception, the Ursula Blickle Video Archive has seen itself as a model for the promotion and expression of contemporary video art. The archive, currently holding around 2,500 works, is constantly being expanded, made visible, and researched. Its lively, ever-growing collection of moving images available to all, which seeks to link theory, practice, and research. It's a strictly virtual archive located at the intersection of an archive documenting museum-based of activities and an experimental online platform like UbuWeb. One integral part of the Belvedere mission, because the archive belongs to Belvedere in Vienna, mission is to actualize or up-to-date the virtual content of the UBVA at the Blickle cinema located in the museum. Through special screenings, the audience is connected to all the works and its makers, as well as to younger filmmakers and artists whose work are then entered into the archive. Claudia Slaner is an art historian, writer, and experimental scholar from Vienna who works at the intersection of film and fine arts, focusing on the performativity of historical narratives, the politics of space, and on feminist art and its aesthetics. From 2015 to 2017, she was an assistant professor at the Department of Site-Specific Art at the University of Applied Arts, Vienna. Since 2014, she has been the curator of the Ursula Blickle Video Archive, and since 2017 of the Blickle Cinema at the Belvedere 21 Museum of Contemporary Art in Vienna. She also co-curates the public program Joint Ventures. So now, Claudia, floor's yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Barbara, for inviting me. It's great to be here. And thank you, Agnieszka and Cezary, for this great presentation. Mine will not be as dynamic as yours, but you will see soon that this is a really very different institution, and I'm happy that we're all here and can share different practices and different institutional approaches, I think. Yeah, I'm going to share my screen with you, and I hope I can do that. What do you see now? No. Do you see the PowerPoint presentation? Okay, great. Yeah, the Ursula Blickle Video Archive, I called it, and the question of accessibility, because that is where we are right now. And to kind of come to that point, I'll give you a little bit of a historic perspective, because I think it's really important in this case where the archive actually came from, what was the beginning of the archive. So the Ursula Blickle Video Archive was founded in 2007, and it was a common project between the Kunsthalle Vienna, the University of Applied Arts Vienna, and the Ursula Blickle Foundation located in Krechtal, Germany. The Kunsthalle Vienna, as you might know, is an exhibition space for contemporary art, and so it was already a very different starting point than the Belvedere Museum, where it is located now. And maybe to say a little bit about the Belvedere Museum, if you don't know it yet, the Belvedere Museum complex is located at the Baroque Castle in Vienna at the upper and the lower Belvedere, and it hosts a collection of mainly Austrian art from the Middle Ages to contemporary times. And the Belvedere 21, as you see here, the Belvedere 21 is the contemporary part of the Belvedere Museum complex. It was incorporated in the Belvedere in 2011, and the building was originally the Austrian pavilion at the World Art Fair in Brussels in 1958. And after being at this World Art Fair, it was relocated to Vienna, and then for a couple of years it was empty. Then it became the Museum of the 20th Century, and then part of the Museum of Modern Art in Vienna. Then they got a new museums building, and it was empty for, I don't know, almost like 15 years, I think. And then it became part of the Belvedere. It became the Belvedere 21. But that doesn't mean that the contemporary collection is located there. It only means that it is exhibited there. So it's on 3 levels. It is an exhibition space for contemporary art, the Belvedere 21. So when it was founded, like I said, the Kunsthalle Vienna doesn't have its own collection. It was already a very different starting point. The University of Applied Arts is still on board, and the Ursula Blickle Foundation is also still on board. The mission then was for the promotion and visibility of contemporary video art. The larger mission was basically to be involved in art education and mediation. There was an award created. There were monthly screenings at the Kunsthalle. And so the mediation part was also basically to promote, to communicate about contemporary video art. It was a non-commercial space. It's also a non-commercial archive. We're not a distributor. We're really an archive. It was always the aim to be accessible free of entry. It also included a public media library. It had a research and screening facility, and it was back then already holding copies only. So we never had actually the original artworks. That means something different now at this point, but it was already at that point, basically back in 2007, it was clear we never have basically the master copies of artworks. We only have the copies. Just to give you an example, the first design of the Ursula Blickle Video Archiv, it was a presentation by Kunsthalle Wien. The development and programming was done by students of the Department of Digital Art at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna. And I'm trying to go back and show you this original interface and how it looked like back then. But I don't know how I can do that. Do you see the Kunsthalle?
Yes, we do.
Okay, that was the original interface basically at the Kunsthalle Wien. And I'm gonna scroll quickly through it. You see, I mean, it's interesting because by now, I mean, talking about media art, by now it's also historical, I think. It shows a very specific aesthetic from the late 90s, I think, late 90s, early 2000s. And it shows you basically where the server was located, how it was programmed, and so on and so on. Then a little bit of the structure of kind of the keywords that were used and how the search could actually be performed. And what was really interesting back at that time, I mean, it was always great to watch the videos as an entire video, basically in their entirety. But also they had this tool where they put 2 artworks next to each other, and then you could compare, which is like this really this method that is used in art history, where you compare artworks. Basically, you look at artworks at the same time and you compare both. This strategy or this method is actually used in art history. So it was interesting that they basically provided that in the original interface. Yeah. To go back to, no, this is my mail program. This is not what you want to see. But I probably have to go back into the presentation. Okay, do you see the presentation again? Great. So the problems of these early years, and I was not there at that time, but now that we kind of faced, because they haven't been properly dealt with at that time, was that there were missing guidelines of what and how. So basically it was conceived as an archive, but it was never clear, and up to now it is not clear to us what was actually archived and why it was archived. It looks as if any moving image that was shown at Kunsthalle at one point was archived and went into the archive, but sometimes artists were not contacted, and they were actually, it was not clear who kind of allowed what and how, for how long, and so on and so on. So we had to deal with a lot of contracts where it was totally unclear how the work came into the archive and why it was there and for how long we were actually allowed to use it. Then updates were really not really done visually and content-wise. The collaboration between the Art University and the archive also fell through at one point, but yeah, I don't know, it's not clear for us why that happened. And the big part of these problems were a rapidly changing media environment. I mean, in 2006, YouTube was basically created, and Vimeo followed, there was UbuWeb, they came tablets, phones, and so on and so on. So this whole kind of environment where you could watch video works kind of expanded rapidly and was really changing rapidly. So when the Blickle archive came to the Belvedere, it was incorporated in 2012. The research center started hosting the Blickle archive. They made a new user interface with a keyword cloud. They created a new database basically, and then it was located at an external server. So there were all these technological changes basically made. When I came in 2014, we had to change it again because the database was not working properly. The interface was not really something where you wanted to spend your time. The search function was not really working, and so on and so on. So in 2016, we created a new database and interface. And now it's this hybrid between an archive and a streaming platform, like we talked about before. Still, we only have copies, but there's a changing character of copies, of course, because now with digital files, how can you tell if there's something, which one is the master and which one is the copy? And that also brings with it the question of the storage medium, because we still have work stored on CDs or DVDs. And I would not consider them as the originals, but the question is, shall we preserve these DVDs and CDs, because they're also kind of representing the medium of that time where you stored things. Yeah, but maybe we can come back to that question in the discussion later on. The present content is about 900 videos that are online, that are kind of accessible through the World Wide Web basically. And then there's access to the 2,500 works altogether from the Belvedere Research Center and at the University of Applied Arts Media Library. So if you want to have access to all the 2,500 works, it would be good if you pay a visit to the Belvedere Research Center or the university. This doesn't have so much to do with the digitalization, but this is due to the contracts, because we always basically let artists decide whether they want to have their work accessible on the World Wide Web, or if they want to limit it to the research center and to the media library. So we leave it really up to them. It's up to them. Yeah, then in 2018, we had the Blickle archive incorporated in Primo, which is this library interface, which is really helpful. And in 2022, we want to switch to TMS collections as a stronger commitment to the Belvedere's art collection, because the Blickle archive is just a very, very small part of the overall collection of the Belvedere. It's maybe a little bit comparable to the Wotropa Foundation, which is a privately founded but then incorporated foundation that is solely dedicated to the work of Fritz Wotropa, a sculptor. And so it has this kind of, it is part of the collection, but then it stands outside like a little bit of a satellite. And to strengthen this commitment of the Belvedere to these little satellites they have, the Wotropa Stiftung, the Wotropa Foundation, and on the other hand, the Blickle Stiftung, the Blickle Foundation with its archive, we plan to switch the database and to TMS, to the museum's collections. The museum system collection, which is an internationally used database for collections, for fine arts collection mainly. But the problem that we face now is actually the video player, because it's not fit for moving images. I mean, it's fit for all works where you have pictures, photographs basically, and it's really great for the documentation. But the question is, what is the technological standard of a video player that we can use, and how are we going to do the data migration? And the funding, which you will see, is also a problem, but this apart from that. The Blickle archive at the Belvedere faces also other problems. There has been the question of the thesaurus or the keywords for a couple of times, and I just want to address the question or the issue here that this is not only kind of a technical question, but this is also a question of how how contemporary are the thesauruses that we use? And we had this project called not only Queering the Archive, but also Queering the Belvedere. We had a series of round tables concerning queer film festivals and queer archives and queering the archives and so on and so on. And that was a question that came up. How can you incorporate certain terms that are missing and that are desperately missing? And how are you dealing with kind of a, I would even say, colonial content of thesauruses and keywords and this kind of question? And then there's the question of annotation. Does it make sense to kind of go even deeper into research and say, okay, let's annotate the video works. What does that mean for us? What does that mean for an overall understanding of the archive, and so on and so on. The theoretical implications behind that are also, what is video art? Is it a media-specific thing, basically, or is it an aesthetic phenomenon, or is it not an aesthetic phenomenon? Because that's what I find as a scholar and as an art historian interesting too. Then the question of the original and the copy, and then also the question of the audience. How do digital natives and kind of convergence cultures use this archive at this point? Or how can we address basically these cultures and these younger generations with the archive? The short-term, long-term strategies are, on the one hand, the actualization of the virtual content at the cinema. So we do regular screenings at the cinema. They're called the Blickle Archive series. On the one hand, we kind of show artworks that we have already in the archive. On the other hand, we always ask younger artists from a younger generation to present their artworks and then to kind of basically incorporate these artworks and the video works into the archive. Then we organize screenings at other institutions and festivals on a regular basis. And one of the projects that we started in 2018, but we haven't followed through, is the idea of the living archive. So we made something like a guided tour through the archive. That was done, that was the example basically, the guided tour through the archive. It was called The Interview, Artistic Strategies, Methods and Aesthetic, by cultural scientist Antonia Rahofer. Her dissertation project is about the interview as an artistic practice, and she basically researched with 10 participants. She let them find interviews or artists working with interviews in the archive and discuss the different strategies and methods. And it was a really great workshop, and I was hoping we could incorporate more of these guided tours into our kind of art mediation program. But we're just at the beginning and we have to find basically more funding. Another long-term perspective is to do a historic expansion and to say, okay, video art from the 1980s and 90s is something that we want to incorporate into the archive, because now it starts around 96. Then more cooperations with universities to do lectures and seminars, and regional collaboration with archives and EU-wide collaborations and research projects. Right now we're working with a festival that is also a platform, Punto Iraya. It's a festival for abstract experimental film and for animations. And yeah, we're working with them on the one hand organizing a festival, but also participating in their database user interface basically, to become as visible as possible. And something that Agnieszka and Cesare said in their previous presentation rang really kind of true to me, which is that they want to be kind of present on YouTube and Vimeo and other platforms, because they think it is really it's really important to make it for as many audiences as possible to make the archive available. And that would be an aim that I would like to follow. But like you see here, the last point again is funding, because that is already, or that is always a problem of funding and how to get funding, and yeah, so on and so on. So I'm at the end of this presentation already. Thank you for listening, and yeah, I'm ready for questions. How do I get back to original? No. Like this. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Claudia. Dusan, it's up to you.
Thank you so much for interesting presentation. I have to say that personally, I've never visited the archive, and I was very curious to hear about it. So thank you for that. Maybe I would like to ask about, let's say, how do you position your archive within, let's say, Austrian context? To put it maybe in a context of other institutions present here, but also within our New Media Museums project, there is not so many video art archives in Czechia and Slovakia and Poland, also, as we heard. In Czechia, there is one large archive now. We will hear about it very soon at the National Film Archive. In Slovakia, there is not really any kind of such an institution actually present. And in Poland, there is one in WRO, and maybe Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw also has quite interesting collection of mostly experimental film, but also video art. So it's mostly these one or two kind of centers in these countries where researchers or audience can kind of come and experience the work. However, in Austria, like we also have Ars Electronica, we have other institutions. So I wonder, like in terms of also maybe in terms of identity building, how do you kind of position your kind of place within the Austrian context?
That's a great question, thank you, because it's also a very difficult question. And I mean, you mentioned one of the main archives already, like the Ars Electronica Center and the Ars Electronica Archive, which is really dedicated to new media art. And I would say it's much more comparable maybe to what Agnieszka said before and to the center than the video archive is. The video archive, I would say, is a very niche archive, because it's also not holding kind of the collective memory of kind of an Austrian heritage, because we have the Film Museum that has its own archive, we have the Austrian Film Archive that is basically responsible for archiving the Austrian film heritage. And then there is another archive, is the Mediathek, who was hosted by the Technical Museum in Vienna. But the Mediathek is more specialized in kind of media documents, basically. So you have a lot of interviews there. You have a lot of recordings from the early time of recordings in general. You have a lot of things that are on the city, on, I don't know, famous personalities, and so on and so on. And ours is really dealing with the moving image in a very broad sense, though. But it is dealing with moving images, and it was really, and that's why I talked so long about its kind of conception basically in 2007, because it was really understood as a video art archive. But what it is now is it's also shaped by the people who ran it basically, and now that I became basically the head curator of it, I'm really incorporating moving images that are not only video art in a very strict sense or in a very historic sense, but that also are at this intersection to moving image works that are maybe more along the lines of classic film works, about experimental film works. We incorporated also installation documentation or performance-based works, because I think that is really important to think about expanded cinema, but also video art that has this immersive and performative character. So we're expanding a lot in this direction. In the future, I also want to incorporate documentary or documentation videos of the public program that we're doing, which is this kind of series of events that deal with kind of contemporary topics and how they can be included and incorporated in the museum. We had lectures, we had performances, we had concerts, and I want to include that in the video archive as well, because I think this makes sense to have the incorporation basically of an expanded idea of a moving image. What else? There is a video, but also a new media and video art archive in Krems at the Danube University. They have their own archive, which is also, I think, different, because they And they all have the original works. We don't really have the original works. That's why I said at the beginning, we're probably more comparable to something like UbuWeb, a mixture between UbuWeb and YouTube and Vimeo, actually. But this brings me also to that point that I mentioned before about the original and the copies, because more and more artists, they come to us and say, okay, what shall we do with the master copies? What shall we do with the master digital files? Do you have storage space for that? And that's what I would love to do if I had the funding, basically to say, yes, we take your master files at this point, and we make sure that we have every 5 years, we have a data migration, we have different solutions basically of that artwork. And yeah, we can take care of that, and you don't have to think about it, because it's getting more and more of a problem, I think, for artists themselves, how to deal with their copies, with their files, with their artworks, basically.
Yes,
yeah.
yes, it's true. And I wonder also, like talking about the artists, so I wonder maybe about connection or relation with Belvedere as museum, and maybe coming to this question of archive versus collection. So if there are artists shown or video or moving image works of artists shown in Belvedere, is it kind of automatic thing that this work would be also archived with you or collected with you, or do you kind of operate in parallel, like with your own kind of curatorial decisions?
I would still like to do that, but I think it's really a question of the contracts. So I'm very, how do you say that, vorsichtig? I'm very, sorry, I don't know the English word for that now.
Cautious.
Cautious, thank you, thank you. I'm very cautious at the moment to really approach them for archiving. The funny thing is that we have a lot of overlapping curatorial decisions. So a lot of people that are shown at the museum I already have in the archive, basically. And I normally have more works by these artists in the archive than they can show at the museum, actually, or in the museum exhibitions, in the museum's exhibitions. But I think it has moved definitely more away from the archive to the collection idea, where it's really about like selecting artists and kind of taking care of their works and not really archiving what is going on, but really saying build a kind of a longer lasting relationship with artists, actually, and to revisit their works and taking in older works that is from the 80s, that is from the 90s, and also providing younger artists the possibility to incorporate basically their artworks in the collection. And I mean, you cannot forget about the social capital, basically, that is connected to artworks, artists having in their curriculum this work. I have works in the Belvedere collection, in the Ursula Blickle archive at the Belvedere. It is really this social capital that comes out of that too. Yeah. I hope that answered a little bit.
Yes. Yeah, so it's also overlapping. So the framing, like there is this collection framing, and there is archival care, but also these works are on one hand, as you said, presented in cinemas and as kind of let's say a single channel kind of projected spaces, but they're also shown as kind of collected works in physical spaces in exhibition halls and so on. So we really have this overlap of archival and kind of collection approach.
And for me, this is also kind of an important part, what I said about the actualization in the cinema, because there are a lot of artworks in the archive that only had been shown in an exhibition context. Sometimes even as like 2-channel versions and as installations. And I really like showing them in the cinema and see what are the different viewing conditions, and does that work, so-called, in the cinema, or how do they shift, how do the viewing conditions shift, how do probably the signification of that artwork shift through relocation. And yeah, I think that's a really interesting part of actualization of an archive. Yeah.
Great. So please, if anyone have anything on mind at the moment, yes, go ahead, Agnieszka.
Yeah, thank you, Claudia, for this presentation. I see that we share a lot similarities also when it comes to the issue of copy and original. Maybe it was also not mentioned clearly that in our case lots of the archival content comes from the submissions to the open call for works that we have every 2 years since 1989. And probably because we also do not have funding to check that, probably many of those artworks from the 1990s are the originals, all these VHS tapes. We are not able to check the actual status. For sure, what we show online is only a part of what we show on site, because you can also enter the media library on site. There is much more content. There were also many donations, like in the old days, the artists were just giving the tapes as a present. Sometimes they were like originally signed, or there were some drawings accompanied. The artists used to do these like original individual covers for the tapes. So this is an important issue. We also do not have the facilities for properly storing the digital files. It's very unprofessional, I would say, even if we are totally conscious about what should be the proper technical infrastructure for the digital storage. Another comment. It just reminded me that when there used to be Ursula Blickle video launch at the Kunsthalle Vienna at the beginning of the 2000s, we were even invited to present a program there. So I co-curated actually a screening program titled Romantica Single Channel Topos, which was a presentation of Polish video art that dealt somehow or has revisited the ideas and theories that appeared during the Romanticism. So there was this video program on view in the Kunsthalle in the headquarters for a month. So I see we share a lot of practices to reach out to the audience using these curated video programs. So that's not a question, a comment, rather. Thank you, Claudia, for your presentation.
Thank you for this comment. Yeah.
Nice to hear these really kind of resonances between different projects. So that's really nice. I'm afraid we are over one half of our event. So if you want to finish on time, I think we have to really move on to next presenters. Barbara, please.
Yes, thank you very much. So now it's time for National Film Archive, Národní filmový archiv from Prague. So again, I'll introduce them very quickly and then give the word to Markéta Jonášová and Matěj Strnad. The mission of NFA is to preserve cinema heritage, to further its public understanding, and to facilitate the development of the Czech audiovisual industry and film culture. Currently, the NFA takes care of more than 150 million meters of film, more than 500,000 photos, over 30,000 posters, and 100,000 promotional materials. Too many numbers. Archival collection and a film library serve professionals engaged in scientific research and are a source of information and materials for contemporary audiovisual production. Markéta Jonášová currently works as a curator at the National Film Archive and at CEAD Gallery in Prague, where she engages with both historical and contemporary forms of audiovisual art. As an independent curator and art critic, she has participated in a number of art projects in the Czech Republic and abroad. She teaches exhibition making in Prague City University. Her research and curatorial practice is anchored in the field of exhibition histories and post-critical museology, embracing feminist, collective, and inclusive approaches. Matěj Strnad is head of curators of National Film Archive Prague and head of programming and access to collection commission, PACC, subcommittee of the International Federation of Film Archives, FIAF. He has published in various magazines and journals and delivered lectures on topics such as film technology, archival dimensions of internet piracy, or the role of a traditional film medium in contemporary art. He is a founding member of Kinoaparát.cz, platform focused on analog film and a specific means of expression, which strives to protect, spread, and further develop the knowledge of classical film technology, which is simply lovely. So I would like to welcome them both and give them floor.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you everyone for having us. We should work hard on updating all of these bios and texts. I'll get to that in a moment. And I should be starting and then passing over to Markéta, as it is my great pleasure and honor just to briefly provide a framework within which Markéta is focused and our video archiving project is focused. And the framework is our institution per se. I hope you can see the presentation and I would be able to move. Yeah. This is us, Národní filmový archiv Prague. It's also quite recently we have started experimenting with using our this as our English name. I'm sorry I haven't updated you on that, but we'll see how it goes actually. Same like the French Cinemathèque or the German Bundesarchiv and Gosfilmofond in Russia. We feel we might give it a try because there's so many national film archives. There's, for example, one at the BFI in London as well, right? So there's like national film archives all over the world, and we are one of them since 1943. And this is sort of our primary point of reference and our primary network, really, the FIA, the International Federation of Film Archives. There's about 130 of us, maybe 150 if you count like different like 115 FTEs or something like that. Speaking of institutions and speaking of film archives, we are rather in the realm of larger institutions, both when it comes to the size and volume of the collection, but also of the number of the operations that we undertake. We are funded and governed by the Ministry of Culture, so sometimes we like to see ourselves positioned or explained through like we do the same thing as the National Library do, but we do it with films, or the National Gallery, National Museum, etc. Only we are focused at film culture, film heritage. And considering this, the primary focus is obviously Czech film heritage. So that's where also the what is called the legal deposit comes from. Same mechanism as you can find in most of the countries in the world, with the local national film productions having an obligation to deposit the films in the respective archives. Same thing with the libraries. We are also governed by the Ministry of Interior, though, which takes care of everything archival in the Czech Republic. So contrary to the popular belief, or contrary to many other places in the world, in the Czech Republic and in some parts of Europe, archives are really considered to be still to be a matter of state and the Ministry of Interior rather than culture. So in many respects, also in this sort of funding and methodology, we are sitting on two chairs in that. Yes, so we are a film archive. I deliberately just chose and picked some photo with film cans, plastic film cans, not to go into those numbers which you, Barbara, beautifully researched and were able to pronounce quite fluently, but they don't really say much, and we are not even sure how precise they are at any given moment, because generally speaking, the film collection and also the special collections are quite huge. And although the primary focus is obviously Czech cinema, this is where the possible debate around collection building and archiving could take place. A large part of the collection is comprised of international films, not only those that have been exhibited in Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia, but generally collected over the years, one way or another. And maybe to just give that as a possible talking point for discussion, this is, in my sort of perception of the film archiving community, a major potential shift, that we are moving away from the collection building, which was quite common in the 20th century, really towards archiving and preservation, also when it comes to selection of films and prioritizing. Because in the early day or in the past, you might have had the urge to build a collection for your cinematheque. You might have had the urge to get one Chaplin film, to have some Italian films, to have what's not, like to have this little representation of the world, world's film heritage. So you would be building a collection. Whereas I think today many of us are moving more into the realm of setting up more precise archival standards and archival guidelines as to what are the actual aspects of film heritage that we focus at, and that we believe that, for example, Chaplin is being preserved in the UK and in the US, that Italian films are with the Italian film archives, and together we care for the film heritage. So that's the sort of dynamics we have at play when it comes to film and cinema. But we should be talking about the new, so I should mention a few things that obviously have always forced us to move away from the traditional paradigm of cinema and film, already starting obviously with experimental film, home movies, amateur films, because all of them conceptually and from our curatorial perspective pose different challenges than the mainstream cinema heritage that primarily was and still is a focus of film archives. So these things have always been sort of on the fringes, and looking at the vast volume of the collection, we have always had to sort of accommodate them somehow and find ways to address them as well. Then obviously what has happened is the turn to the digital, meaning that maybe, like 11 years ago, pretty much quite over a few years only, the whole cinema production and distribution change has been digitized, meaning that both most of the production taking place, but also the distribution and exhibition is now digital. So as we have the legal deposit, we have naturally moved into this world already quite some time ago, and I think that's one of the good reasons why we felt we could try this thing with video and video art, just simply that our infrastructure was and is robust enough to accommodate for born digital cinema, and that is like both the knowledge and the practice that can be very useful when addressing media art or video art from the point of preservation. And I think the whole introduction to what Markéta is going to be talking about really meant to briefly explain why this project of ours and the approach we have is, I would think, really preservation focused, and not only, same as with all the other things that we do, There's no point in preserving anything if you can't give access to it. There's no point in preserving anything if you can't curate it, etc. The actual making use of the collection and making use of the archive is the only thing that can legitimize the preservation itself. But considering the context where we come from and where we are based, I think that's the reason why we might seem quite preservation focused in our research project concerned with video. The last example I mention here is our previous research project which dealt with Laterna Magica, this multimedia theater or interactive, not say interactive, but say a multimedia theater performance genre developed in the late 50s, which comprised of live stage action, music, set design, dancing, and obviously film projections. And that was another sort of incentive and challenge for us to be able to address it from the preservation perspective when we were approached by the National Theatre with all of these film cans and film prints from the Laterna Magica shows. So we had to somehow start conceptualizing this form as being somehow relatable to our standard film preservation practice. And that's it for myself and some sort of general overview. And I would now move to Markéta's part of the presentation and give word to her. Markéta, are you with us? Sorry.
Yes. Hi. Can you all hear me well? Thank you, Matěj, for the introduction. And I would like to briefly move to our video archive project, or video archiv in Czech. So as Matěj mentioned, the openness of the National Film Archive towards experimental audiovisual art or moving image allowed for this big collection of the Academic Research Center of the Academy of Fine Arts to be transferred to the National Film Archive in 2019. This initial video archive collection that was actually established in 2007, I think, at the Academy of Fine Arts, shares a lot of features with the Ursula Blickle archive, I would say, and I wanted to focus on some of the issues that were related to it. Basically, it consists of hundreds of works, and it was more like a referential collection that was developed at the Academy by collecting students' works and collecting works based on very much institutional or personal relations. So there was no collecting policy that would provide with more objective criteria for the selection of the works that were represented there. There were also no masters. It's like mostly basically digital files of really varying quality. Often even the artist would provide this collection with files that would not be the best files they have. And there would be also often DVDs transferred to the digital files rather than the original DVDs being stored or the VHS cassettes. There were also no object components or documentation of installations part of this collection, and no contracts, no licenses, which is also something that Claudia mentioned, that the rights to the artworks were often not secured. And there was no basically archiving strategy even for this corpus or for these digital files. They were pretty much stored on hard drive that we then received and started processing. So from this, the National Film Archive started a big research project in 2020, which is for 3 years, and the title is the audiovisual work outside the context of cinematography, documentation, archiving, and accessibility. And it is very much focused on audiovisual art rather than multimedia, complex multimedia installations or computer art. And just to discuss the naming of it, I think could be a discussion or a debate on its own. So I'm just going to introduce it like that. But also because of the facilities of the archive, we do not collect or archive the equipment and the object components that could have been part of the installations. So Matěj, can I have the next slide? So basically, based on all the issues that I introduced in the previous slide, we developed over the past year and a half an acquisition process that is very much undertaken by the team of the video archive, but in collaboration with the other departments of the National Film Archive. And that's really important because without that, it couldn't have been facilitated. So it starts with a preliminary research of the works we have, and we research into their history. We very much also collaborate with the Department of Special Collections, particularly the Department of Written Records, seeing if they have any documents related to it or if they could help us with the research on both the author and the work and its exhibition history, for instance. Then together with the digital department, we evaluate the materials that we get from the authors or that have been part of the video archive that I mentioned, and choose based on the criteria the most authentic and best version for archiving, and both archiving and presenting. That could be two different things. Then we also collect the data from the authors when it's still possible in collaboration with the oral history collection. So we do really very much follow the principles of oral history and preserve the interviews we conduct at that department. Then we have to conduct new agreements with the artists, and that is related both to the storing of the works and their distribution. So with that, we collaborate with the legal advisors of the archive and also with the sales department that takes care of the distribution. And once all this is finished and we have signed the agreements and collected the materials that we want to preserve, we start with the documentation and archival descriptions in a new database that is very much linked to the archiving system. We are using Atom and Archivmatica for this. And there is also the department of the digital curator that helps us with the archival description and with the mediation of the content on those platforms. And obviously also the digital department, the digital lab is very much involved in this process because they do take care of the works being stored on the LTO tapes and mediated through the systems further. And then finally, obviously, as Matěj mentioned, very important thing is for the works to circulate and to be presented. So we try to incorporate them in really different modes of presentation, from screenings to exhibitions to publications that we don't do just ourselves, but we very much collaborate with festivals and established museums and other subjects that kind of have interest in the presentation of audiovisual art. And then in the final slide, if I can have it, Matěj, I would just try to focus on the criteria that we have discussed for the selection of the works, because as I mentioned, it's hundreds of works and our project is only for 3 years and it is a research project. So that means that the idea is also that we develop a methodology that can be then used by other museums and institutions. So we tried to process a really wide sample of different works within the scale that we can actually take care of. So I put together, I would say, 10 main criteria, how we select the works that we want to archive and basically process first, because we cannot at the moment process all of them. So mostly the main criteria is the condition of the media, which is quite obvious. So if there is tapes or film materials that are really obsolete or in danger of being deteriorated, then they have the priority to be preserved. That comes together with evaluating its art historical significance, and for that we obviously have to take into account also different art historical narratives, and be careful about gender equality and representing like both the centers like Prague and Brno, but also more peripheral approaches from other parts of the country. We also aim for a generational variety, so representing equally the period from the 70s to more contemporary times, and the media and genre variety, which has also been mentioned, that it could be from the documentation of performances to 3D animation, etc. So we kind of try to cover all these different genres as well. Then there could be different legal issues related to it and modes of distribution. So we want to provide different examples of possible licenses as well. So that is another focus, as well as the way the works could be installed. So we try to focus on developing feasible documentation for works that are both like multi-channel installations and that are mostly aimed for the presentation in cinema or online, so to cover the very varying presentation modes. And last but not least, there are these two very important criteria or perspectives, which is the nominations from various subjects, because it's really important for us not to think which things to archive just ourselves, but to have more objective inputs from other professionals or people active in the field. So for instance, when there is going to be a big publication, the artworks nominated in the essays will become part of the archiving process, or I included an invitation from one program we did, which is actually titled What is Absent in the Video Archive, and we invite external professionals to look at what has been in the original video archive and ask them what they think is missing from different perspectives, and then include that also in the archiving process. And then last but not least, there is the, because this all sounds like very much objective and like, yeah, this is great that we can nominate all these different artworks, but then obviously you have a lot of unprecedented events that can happen, like a global pandemic, for instance, and all these criteria become very problematic because suddenly you cannot approach older people or people who have kids and have to take care of them, or people who are ill or with like difficult health conditions. And for this whole process, this contact is really important. So basically in the past year when we started, we also had to adjust the things that we wanted to archive to this situation. Yeah, so I would maybe finish with that, and we can discuss more during the debate. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you. I have to say I really liked your screen with challenges with the 6 no's. No collection policy, no masters, no licenses, no archiving strategy, no documentation, no object components. Is really reads like a manifesto of folk archiving, right? Yeah, let me ask you about, because basically your organization is different to all the others being discussed today in terms of its national mandate. So you are a national archive, And I wonder how this mandate affects your work with the video archive, because there it may be in a maybe different situation than the film medium.
Do you think so? I would let Markéta answer how it affects the video archive project per se, but it is like, obviously we try to take this task and interpret it as broadly as possible in the sense of our understanding of, and now I will use the broader term of, like, Czech film culture or Czech cinema culture, right? So, and luckily enough, well, the only place where this is a factor is actually the legal deposit thing, like where there's obviously like a lot of calculations on what makes a Czech film and what doesn't, depending on the production and co-production status of etc. etc. But and on the other hand, the legal deposit is like the bare minimum that we are supposed to be doing. Other than that, we are maybe luckily enough that, depending, you can interpret it both ways, but we are left with our sort of mandate to fill it with how our own understanding of it. So our understanding of Czech film culture might actually be much broader than our funders might expect us, but that's fine, I think, and that's one of the advantages of being somehow a very official institution, which we are, but at the same time maybe slightly misgoverned in the sense that we really belong both to the Ministry of Culture and the Ministry of Interior, and you could also frame it like we are left with a lot of trust to fulfill our mandate and fill it with some content. But that's sort of to answer the question more broadly from the perspective of the whole collection, where maybe the last point is really that, and as I was explaining, you know, the shift away from the collection building to archiving somehow, or preservation. The primary focus there is also that we take care of things that no one else does. When it also comes to how we understand Czech films. So, for example, if you have a very successful Czech filmmaker like Miloš Forman, whose US-American films are preserved in the respective US-American film studios, we don't really strive to sort of, you know, have a preservation master of Forman's Hollywood films. But that might not apply to Jan Němec, another Czech filmmaker who made films abroad, but just not on such a scale and budget as Forman. So we then take care of these things as what we call bohemicals, right? But maybe Markéta can answer that from the point of view of like selecting the selection and navigation within the video archive. But I'm not so sure it actually differs that much, Dusan, like you suggested.
But sorry, I didn't get differ from what compared to National Film Archive?
The film and video.
Yeah, because your kind of mandate is that you are a film archive of Czech Republic, and in terms now basically you took over this video collection from the academy. So now you're also sitting on this video art archive. So my question was how this national mandate affects your work with video itself, with video art. But yeah, we heard already from Matěj, and actually we won't have probably so much time for discussion at the end, and it's mostly me asking questions, and actually I'm a little sick and my voice is in very weird octave, so I would very much prefer if anyone has any comments or feedback or questions, please go ahead and yeah, let's discuss further.
I have a comment and a question. Thank you for the presentation. That was really very insightful. And yeah, I also thought the no, that was definitely something I had to cope with. And admittedly, we're still coping with some of these no's. And so yeah, that was very great how you structured it and mentioned it. And I was also thinking at the end where you talked about the criteria for archiving the different video works, I thought it's interesting because these criteria are also super valid criteria in building a collection. So they actually work both ways. And I thought, that's interesting, this kind of selection process that works really both ways. Yeah, so thank you for this kind of insight again. And I have one very pragmatic question, very, very pragmatic. How many people are involved in this project about the video art archive or the video archive?
So within the project for these 3 years, it's, I would say, 3 positions. And then, as I mentioned, the people who are already working in the archive are participating, but they obviously also have their own agenda. So just to some extent. Am I right, Maciej, or have I forgotten someone?
Yeah, that's about right. Really, yeah. It's a strange thing in the sense that, you know, for us, in order to be able to investigate the sheer possibility of preserving video and maybe sort of systematically start talking about it in our context, was to frame and put together a research project. So it's really a research project that's going to end, and at the end, we would be left again with what we have minus the 3 people that we were able to hire for the time period. And then we, if nothing great happens, if nothing major changes in like structurally, we would be slowly processing the rest of the collection that Markéta mentioned, for example. But at the same time, we are trying hard to find partners and see if the methodology that we have developed could be put into use, if we possibly could be playing some role in this also in the future as, say, a service provider to galleries and museums who haven't been able to develop this sort of methodology and this sort of infrastructure yet for themselves. But that would depend, again, structurally on the Ministry of Culture very much in our case. But at the same time, like when we started this or before we started it, I always was trying to stress that we really don't want to be colonizing the field. And we have enough problems on our own. You know, even if we were stuck with our like film preservation problems, that would be enough. But as at the same time we had the infrastructure and we had some of the expertise and some of the will, a lot of the will to actually investigate the problem, we went into this research project, and now we are sort of seeing what the options might be for some sustainability. That's why I'm also glad that we have connected with Dusan, Jakub, Barbara here and the project in Olomouc, that together maybe we could talk about some coordinated push. But if there was a publicly funded, institutionalized place that would be doing this video archive thing, me personally, and maybe I'm speaking on behalf of the institution as it is, we'd be perfectly fine with that. The reason why we started it was that there was nothing else, actually. Nothing as systematic that would make us sort of happy and you know, be able to go to sleep.
And there is, as I mentioned, there is many gaps, and there is the need to collaborate with art museums because of that object components and those complex installations that we cannot facilitate, and also because of the huge challenge of net art, you know, or like these developing digital technologies.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, both. I think it's a great connection to Patricia's paper. So I would now move there. And we'll see how much time for discussion we'll have at the end. Patricia Falcao is a time-based media conservator working at Tate, where she researches and develops strategies for the preservation of software-based artworks. More recently, in the context of the Reshaping the Collectible project, this has been broadened to include the acquisition and preservation of web-based artworks. In the past 8 years, she has consistently published on the theme of preservation of time-based media, digital and software-based art, and the conservation and digital preservation communities. So Patricia, she's represented not just State Museum, but also Goldsmiths, University of London. I would like to give you word and space. Welcome here.
Sorry, still muted, I didn't notice. Hello, everybody. Yes, like Barbara said, I have one fourth of a hat and another 3/4 of a hat, because I am a time-based media conservator at Tate, and then I'm a doctoral researcher between Tate and Goldsmiths in their computing department, and what I'm going to talk about is mostly based on my work at Tate. And after seeing your presentations, I decided to add a couple of slides to my talk, so if there's anything out of place, that's why. But I hope it just makes more sense, I think, and it's not. This talk is mostly based on my work at Tate. The research I'm doing at Goldsmiths is looking at what artists are doing to preserve their own work, their own software-based artworks, which of course is very tightly, closely related to my job as well. So I'm going to just start to give, if I can change my slide, which doesn't seem to, there we are. Just a little introduction to Tate, just for context. And so Tate has one collection, but it has 4 museums. So that's Tate Britain, Tate Modern in London. There's Tate St. Ives in Cornwall and Tate Liverpool in Liverpool. And so there's the central collection, but the curatorial teams are divided between international artists, and this is only fine art, whatever that means. They're mostly based, at least in London, is based at Tate Modern, and then you have British art at Tate Britain. To give you a sense of scale, the total number of employees is it's just under 1,000 people, but this includes everything from catering, the whole collection care teams, curatorial, publishing, research. So it's a mammoth of an institution with all the advantages and disadvantages. And I'm a conservator, so I trained as a furniture conservator to start with. I've learned everything about the chemistry of the objects. I think of things as materials and how they degrade. That's sort of my focus. And then I was plonked into new media art and enjoyed it very much. But that's still my focus is this object. And I think that this presentation will focus on that. Again, for a sense of scale, the conservation department at Tate has over 40 people, I want to say 50. And just the time-based media team, there's 11 of us plus a series of freelancers that some of them have worked at Tate longer than I have, and I've been here for 12 years. So it's quite a scale. It's a bit of a daunting scale sometimes. It also means that, for instance, don't ask me about the Tate archives, because I wouldn't dare talking about their work. They're very nice and very kind and very good, but I really don't know much about what they do. What's useful here is to maybe think a little bit about Tate's mission. And for me, the important bit is that this is legal. It's in our this is from the legal document that describes Tate, and it is to care for and preserve, and it's works of art that I'm talking about, and they need to be exhibited to the public. So we're talking about objects that go into the gallery, and that's the main focus. They should also be available for study of research, and that's true, you can come and study or research an object, but it's a lot more difficult than getting into the galleries if a work is not installed. And just to give you a sense of the whole collection, this is the whole of the Tate collection. The blue is all the drawings that Turner ever made, basically. The blue one is all the other media, and then this tiny bit of pink, it's time-based media. So we're a tiny amount of the collection. And, the main thing, the biggest number of objects is sort of paper prints and and photographs actually, and then paintings as well. And these are the sort of objects that I'm talking about. So you have, this is a film work by Daria Martin, and it's literally a film, and it's being constantly projected in the gallery. So it's like 70 hours a week of a film being projected. And that has its own issues if you're talking about preservation for something where this is what you want to do with it. This is an audio piece with sculptural elements, performance art. This is an interactive installation with software by Rafael Lozano-Hammer, subtitled Public. This is a video installation by Apishapong Quirasetical, which is this was installed at the tanks in Liverpool, at Tate Modern, which is this massive space that used to contain oil for the power station. So as a conservator, the first thing we do is to think about, so what is this object that we are looking at? And what do we need to preserve it and to maintain it, so that it stays displayable over the next 100 years, let's say it like that and be optimistic. And this is sort of how I tend to break it down. When I need to do sort of a risk assessment for a work that is coming into the collection, this is how I try to think about it. And at the core of the work, there's always the conceptual elements that can really change the way you see all the other elements. You always have some sort of media playback. In this case, you have a little computer, but it could be a film projector or a media player, which is mostly what we do with video. Actually, you'll have the media or the software or the data, whatever you're displaying. We could also be talking about a film projector or slides. The space is really important for most of our works. We do have some that are fairly simple, it's shown on a monitor, for instance, but in most cases, the space and how an object sits in the gallery is really important. And then I did this slide thinking about software-based artwork. So there's I call them peripherals, but they're actually the display materials. So if you have a projector or a monitor, and I'll go into that. And so the conceptual elements for us usually come through artist statements and interviews and the curatorial proposals and the installation specifications that we receive from artists. So they're not really palpable unless you ask, you don't know. The display space, of course, has a massive impact of how a work looks like. This is the primitive that I've showed you before. This is how it was installed in fact. This is how it was installed at Tate Modern. And it just, it always varies a lot depending on where it is being shown. And Apishapong is always there. Well, so far he's always there to define that. And that's, of course, an issue. And we try to learn with every display to see, to understand what could we do if Apishapong is not there to make these decisions. This is the same space with the display equipment visible, so you can see the projectors, where they are, and the sound, where it's coming from, which is really important for a piece like this. This is the media, and that's just all the files used to show the work, and they're all in this little hard drive. And this is the display equipment, so media players, the speakers, the projectors. And so we try to gather all this information very early on. And one of the advantages of being at Tate and it being this old institution with so many people is that our processes are very set, which can be sometimes a pain. If you want to change anything, it's really difficult. You need to make a really good case. But it also does mean that there are these processes that are very clear. And so we start out, there's always this acquisition moment, and it is, it goes through the whole curatorial process where you have curators that identify the collection strategy, select the artworks they want, contact the artists or the galleries that they want to work with, and then they come to conservation and to registrars and to the legal department, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some people that are very important as well, but and they tell us, look, we are trying to we want to acquire this piece. What what do you think? Or what are your comments? And so we do an initial analysis of this work. And then and for the rest of the talk, I'm just going to focus on that acquisition moment, because for me, it's really the core of what we do. If we do that moment right, it's sort of the rest of the life of the work is much safer. You know, if we have this one moment where we can really focus on what that artwork is and what we need to do for preservation, then, you know, there's still a lot that can go wrong in the future, but there is a minimum there. And so actually, so you have the acquisition process, the artwork comes into the collection. It many times just goes straight into storage as we do all the archiving processes and all the preservation steps into storage, or sometimes it will go in display. And that's a whole series of other processes that I'm not so involved with, but my colleagues you know, do a whole new set of steps to ensure that the work is displayed properly in the gallery and that an artist is happy with it. And then eventually there's a moment where we have to do some sort of intervention because of obsolescence, as was mentioned here, or, I mean, mostly because of obsolescence. Sometimes artists come back with new masters. For instance, it has happened with us for works that had originated in film that was then used to create a digital master, where artists went back and said, oh, okay, I had this in standard definition, and now I have this in 4K definition. Do you want to have it? Or actually, it's more like you need to have it. So we've started dealing with that a lot more over the last few years. So one of the reasons I think, or some of the reasons I think the acquisition moment is so important is because it's this one moment where the institution or the collection is taking responsibility for the artwork. I mean, we work with artists as much as we can and for as long as we can. But at the point of acquisition, we should be able to present a work without the artist. And this can be a big ask sometimes. And it's really hard for some artists to let go. But you also then start building a relationship. And that's, again, at this point, this is really important, is for an artist to understand that we want to engage with them. We want to learn about the artwork. And we want to demonstrate that we can care and that we have the knowledge to care for these types of artworks. And so at this point, we are creating these spaces for understanding the work and understanding what we can change and how something can be changed. And this is very much down to the conceptual aspects of an artwork. This is sort of the type of documentation that we create at acquisition. So you have sort of the basic tombstone information, but we then define a type, you know, the level of risk for a piece. You know, if it's just a single channel video, I'm like, yeah, that's fine, we can do it. It takes us 2 days for cataloging and digital storage, but there's this sort of risks, and we'll need so much staff time, and it's going to cost so much on storage. And then we also try to provide information about displaying the work, how much that might cost. It's quite important at the moment, especially for curators, to have a sense that something may be really expensive for a reason they're not necessarily aware of. And then also understanding the equipment that we could be using and whether it's something we have or it's something we need to buy or it's something that we may need to buy when the work is displayed. This is, again, for Apishapong Veresetekul, this is what the artwork looked like when we received it. It was this, and in the drive, there's also the documentation. There's the video files, and there's all the documentation about how the work was shown in the past. So it doesn't look like much, especially if you think that it then turns into this massive room installation. We didn't have the metal tower, fortunately. That was just that fact. And when we have something, you know, most of the artworks at the moment come in hard drives. We are starting to see more and more things coming on via download. which somehow it's still, if it's a big file, it's still much worse than a hard drive because it's just a pain to download big stuff without it being corrupted. But we take this step quite seriously in terms of making sure that whatever data is being supplied by the artist at the point of acquisition, that we maintain it, that is intact, that we don't alter something that the artist may have supplied, that we don't delete something by mistake. It's one of my little nightmares when I attach a drive, or before we got the drive blocker, that I would sort of by mistake just put something in the bin and not notice. And so because of this move to digital, actually, we became much more aware of digital preservation. And that's become, over the last 10 years, it's more, since 2008, so 12 years, it's more and more we've been learning from that field on how to care for our digital data. And we've learned a lot about quality control. This is an essential step at acquisition. We receive files from an artist. We always check it. This is QC Tools, which is an open source tool to analyze video. And it tells you a lot about the file you're looking for. It helps you to find errors. I mean, usually the files that come are fine, but every so often you get something that is like, it's the wrong work. It happened a couple of times where we got the wrong masters by mistake, or sometimes there's an export, there's a problem with the file that it wasn't noticed, and by analyzing it, we see it, we go back to the artist and say, look, there's like this 20 seconds of black, is this meant to be there or not? And then because it's digital, sometimes we have a little bit of an issue. This is a beautiful aspect because the problem with this work, it's a video work. And we received the file, it was all perfect. But usually we look at videos with different players just to see if there's no problem, because players are all different and the files are. And it played perfectly well with QuickTime, which is one of our usual players. And then we played it with VLC, which is another usual player. And it just did that. And we kind of went like, okay, that's clearly not what it's meant to be, because it's only on VLC like that. But what's the problem? And so this was a little research project on why this video was playing wrong, was not being played correctly by VLC. So that meant looking into the video file, into the metadata in that file, and do a little bit almost forensic analysis to find out that the problem was just how the video was encoded. And so we went back to the artist and told him, and then we corrected the error. And this is at the moment the copies for preservation. So we would have viewing copies. AVP is a format that is used for display. So traditionally, this would have been a DVD that was ready to put into a player to play in the gallery. Nowadays, these are mostly files. And then we create a lot of copies of that. And this was at a point where our digital repository wasn't in place. So we actually had 3 copies by having one on a hard drive and then 2 data tapes. And then we have the artist supplied master that in this case, I think it just had color bars. So there was a few differences that we also copy multiple times in different supports. For software, it's a little bit different. We do the amount of research we do for each work. It's a lot more complex because each one has a different. There are different systems altogether. It's not like video where you're depending on one technology that works more or less in a standardized way for each software-based artwork is its own system. And so it's slightly, at the moment, it's sort of going from each one is a case study to we have a process, but it's taken us 10 years to get here. We don't have that many of them either, so it's not so bad. And then at the end of the acquisition process, we also aim to have a display specification. So we just work as much as possible with the artists and the the curatorial team and our colleagues in conservation that work more on displays to sort of make sure we have the information we need to display the artwork. And that's sort of more or less what's it's mostly very practical. It's sort of how big does a space need to be, or how small, and are there any specific characteristics of a projector that you need? How many components are there? Is it one? So it is very practical, but it's also very, very useful. And sorry, I usually have a slide to end the presentation, but this one really got away. But I'll just stop now. And I feel like I ran through it a little bit, but I was a bit worried with time. So.
Oh, you did well.
And now I'm doing very badly with not sharing my screen. There we are.
Okay, so thank you so much, Patricia. That was really great. I'm very happy to have your voice here as well, because you really have these different perspectives from the archival side and from, let's say, museum side, where you deal also with the physical kind of components of the work kind of more actively. It's a really deal with these works as kind of space-based. let's put it that way. And you also bring in a perspective of art conservator, which is also very crucial in this kind of conversation. And I know that you could speak about so many different things for a very long time. And I would also say that the institution you've been working at, CEAD, is almost like, well, I would say it's really the role model for time-based media art care, I would say, worldwide. And in terms of your practice, but also in terms of research and publications that you have been putting out over last years and even decades. You yourself and also Pip Lawrenson and also so many others of your present and past colleagues. And also, I mean, now you're working as a PhD candidate at Goldsmith, and maybe this is also interesting, maybe for others, that it has been doing these collaborations with universities in UK, is to do this kind of practice-based PhD research, where the students or PhD researchers are really focusing on kind of preservation issues surrounding certain parts of collection. So they were like researches on software-based works, on performance-based works, and so on. And this is also very valuable for, I mean, for a broader field as well. I mean, including myself, who spent several years doing a similar PhD and actually still not finished, but that's another story. So
don't tell me about that part. I'm still on my second year, so I haven't gotten there yet. I'm in denial. Don't tell me.
Okay. So no, I mean, let's not go that direction. But no, let me just phrase maybe a question. So I would say that for people working in museums, it can be almost disarming to hear that a time-based media conservation team includes 11 people. And yeah, to take care of this type for this kind of works, you also have a really well equipped laboratory and so on and so on. But my question would be, what would you advise a museum or a collecting institution if it only has, of course, overworked curators and, let's say, conservators, mostly kind of focusing on traditional media? So what would you advise them if they still want to engage more deeply in collecting and taking care of time-based media works? That's a hard one, huh?
I think it's. I mean, at CEAD we're very lucky with all these conservators, but it is a tradition, and conservators were always very present from, I don't know, the 1950s. So, and there are other museums that are dealing with this, and they don't have the team we have, and they're doing it, and different people do different aspects of the work that we at CEAD sort of started doing ourselves just because it was easier to do it within our team than it was to sort of try and force other people to do something, you know. Which is sort of, it's easy, it's much easier now, but when you first started, there were issues just inputting information into TMS. Time-based media conservation is the only team that does that for our objects. Otherwise, the registrars do it for everybody else. But that's because it's such specialized information that we put in there that when we started, there was so much resistance. I think I wasn't here at the point, but that it was just easier. Okay, we'll just do it ourselves. But so this thing can be, as long as you're very clear about what you want to collect and what you want to do with that object, and then you know the information you need, and you just agree with your colleagues who does what. And I mean, I know it's probably pretty hard to push a conservator that always only dealt with paintings to sort of engage with digital. So at some point it might be easier to find someone that is interested in digital preservation and in art and just train them. And if you're starting slow, you just work with someone to do that. And I think the example from, okay, I'm going to say the Czech National Film Archives because I can't, I will not, the case study, this sort of project where you build the knowledge in-house and you make the case to hire somebody. That's how I would do it.
Could I have a brief question? Just how many works do you manage to process, to acquire per year in your department? And if you, because I know I'd say that the acquisition process is very complicated, but mostly starts with curators. So I was wondering whether you also have a say in what's being acquired.
I have no say on what's being acquired. No, none whatsoever. Sometimes, I mean, I had a fear because until a few years ago, we only came in literally the last moment before a piece was agreed for acquisition, which is then sort of something really bad has to happen for a work not to be acquired. And then at one stage, because of the costs of acquiring this piece, we started being asked earlier and earlier for estimates of that acquisition cost. And at one point I was really worried. I was like, I mean, if it's an important work, then I don't want to be the one to, if I tell someone that it's going to be £10,000 and the work itself is 3,000, it's like a curator might go like, no, maybe not. But that hasn't happened. I mean, I've given some really wild estimates over the last few years and that has not happened. So I stopped worrying about it. But no, I have no say on what's acquired at all. And sorry, and I missed your other question, I think.
How many works do you manage to acquire per year?
For us, I always moan because it's very different to have 40 single channel videos or have one software-based artwork. So I think if you want a number, last year was around, no, not last year, 2 years ago, it was about 40 works in a year. Not 12, there's not 12 people working on those acquisitions, so there's only 4 to 5, plus the freelancers actually. So yeah, maybe 8 people working on acquisitions.
Okay, I will just pop up because we have around 10 minutes now, so I would allow 1 or 2 in maximum questions, if I may.
I really encourage to. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. What is this? I can see. Oh, I see a hand. Barbara Sepchiva, please go ahead. Your mic is off, or at least I can hear. No, I can.
Can you hear me?
Yes, it's better.
Okay, so I had maybe a little bit general question. for all of you, because you are talking about problems in the past, like maybe the lack of funding or the strategy with archiving. So my question is like, what is the biggest problem nowadays? Maybe for your institution or as an individual working in the institution?
At Tate, after COVID, funding?
I think this is actually the same still. We are still fighting with money, actually, and also all the technical issues. It's still the same. It's not a problem of the past. It's a problem of the current situation, I guess, at least for us.
If I may add to the Olomouc Museum of Art, I think the main trouble why we didn't start to collect new media art in the past was that there was just lack of expertise, and that we carry too much responsibility for the artworks, and without the knowledge how to care for them, how to preserve them, and so on, you can't take the responsibility. That's why the collection hasn't started until today.
I might add here also a word. Funding, of course, but what is connected with that is that, well, in our case, let's say the better structured digitization project or process was connected to a certain project. In our case, we were part in 2010 till 2013, I guess, of this Digitizing Contemporary Art EU-funded project, where we were with 25 institutions, 11 or actually more, like content providers and the technical coordinators, advisors, and centers of technical expertise. And then when the project ends, there is no sustainable way to keep that aggregated expertise within the organization, which really means you can have some people hired and you can train them for the time living of the project. You can also learn by yourself, but then there's no way to keep those people. So the knowledge goes with them. And actually, there is also at some certain moment, there's a wall. You cannot transform that old knowledge for the 20th time to a new collaborator. So that is very much connected with funding, and also with I would say national strategies how to deal with the archives. For instance, in Polish case, I really don't know the situation now, how the Ministry of Culture, through their specialized institutions, what is their policy towards copyright. But after completing the DCA project, I guess it was 2014 or 15, I was so happy that the Ministry of Culture launched the then new program for digitization of archives, actually research and digitization of archives. So we wanted to use this research part a lot, and also take care of our photography archives, like all the documents of all the past festivals and art events. So we wanted to really do a more structured research, let's say, like doing as if we would go through an acquisition process, but the source of it was our archive. Like what videos, what units do we do we have, or should we digitize, how to organize the entire process, etc. Which then it turned that it was not possible because they required a recept of that funding project. And then we were successful. We got this grant. And then actually, while we were negotiating the terms of agreement, it turned out there was this little paragraph that the content we will digitize, we have to deposit, we had to deposit one copy of each item to the, let's say, national, like main national archive, which was of course understandable because the digitization process would be funded with the public money. But they wanted also to have the right to transform like the license to any third party. So we started to ask what that third party would be, because you know, in our case, we do not buy artworks. We are entrusted with the artworks by the artists who really hope and trust us that we will provide the proper, let's say, intellectual context. And they weren't really, you know, it was also for them the first time they ran that kind of project. Those people came from libraries, so they had experience in working with digital contents of digital libraries, so they couldn't really imagine what it means to give the exploitation right to a file that contains an original video piece to be played as an installation, or you know. So they really couldn't say what could be that third party. And then like accidentally I read an article back then that, you know, this very institution signed an agreement with Google Art and they were, you know, announcing so proudly that, you know, lots of artistic content would be made available on Google Art. And then at that moment, we just said, okay, stop. We are not signing that contract, you know. So because it would be not in line with the very nature of our archive. So there are lots of problems that are typical for each, let's say, regional, national situation. How the ministries are dealing with the intellectual property rights, with licenses. But in most cases, I really don't know how it is now in Poland, but my previous experience is that they were really very greedy and they wanted to have it all and share with whomever they liked. So basically, due to that experience back then, we actually stopped looking for any structural funding opportunities, and we just keep on, you know, doing our work with the digitization, but we may allow it to ourselves. We are an, you know, independent NGO. We don't have this strict legal mission that we have to fulfill. So yeah, that's maybe also an answer to this question.
Thank you very much, Agnieszka. I think there are quite a lot of topics to discuss. Fortunately, we have two another sessions, so I would like to invite you all to the other one, which is planned for 15th of October, and I really do hope very much we'll see each other. Also because the quite interesting thing which was mentioned in all the papers, but with Patricia's and also Agnieszka right now, is the relationship between the institution and the artist, and the position of the artist in all this surrounding, which is quite, I still think so, which is quite interesting and special in this connection of new media art. So let's focus on the artist in the next session. Let's deal with all these kind of elements we've discussed right now. I would like to thank you all. It was absolutely lovely afternoon. I must say for myself, although it's quite sunny here in the Czech Republic, it was a nice time to spend with you. Have a lovely afternoon, lovely evening. Thank you all, and see you soon. Bye bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
It was really good.
Bye.
Thank you for inviting me.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.